Do y'all ever just play a game because you found a random image on the internet? Cause for me, it was this. Like, how is this man? Is his mustache even real? Why do the pre-renders look so shiny? And look at this blue screen artifacting. Nice. Well, turns out it was from a SEGA Saturn game called RAMPO, or RAMPO, if you want to be all weeb about it. A game starring an old Japanese writer called Edogawa Rampo and his apprentice, I think? There's also an anime based on him with a decently similar looking main character, though. I mean, let's be real, the fuck is this character design even worth shit if it ain't got that stash? Dude was very influential to Japanese murder mystery type writing anyway, and so the fact that this is an FMV game is pretty hecking fitting. It plays much like D, or the non-static image versions of Myst, or titles like The Seventh Guest and The Mansion of Hidden Souls. And that you use the D-pad to navigate down various predetermined FMV paths, triggering triggers and engaging cutscenes as you go. What's interesting here, though, is that unlike any of those games I mentioned, it doesn't really have you press any buttons outside of the inventory other than that of the D-pads. Interacting with something simply requires the pressing of forward when facing it, which when paired with the quickly loading sequences and the generally fast-moving movements as opposed to every other FMV game ever, makes for one smooth little game. Not to say that it's high action by any means, as the story is about the titular Rampo suffering a writer's block, getting into landlording to find inspo, and so he finds himself owning an eccentric, spooky mystery mansion in which no girls are allowed, for some reason, up until when suddenly you end up finding some smuggle bitches. Wouldn't really know that from the description on the box, though. He feels comfortable inside his comfort-smelling Namagochi, remembering his childhood days when he used to lie here, pretending it was a ship. Tears come to his eyes. This old Nagamochi held the trousseau of his mother. Memories of her tenderness, her sweet smile fill his heart. He carves Osei as a curse. Bruh, hell yeah. That feel when you carve Osei as a curse. As goofy as all of that is, though, it's not really in line with what the game is actually like. The tone is moody, the acting is quite good. If reviews by Japanese speakers are to be believed, the writing is solid, the music is really nice and looming, the cinematography and shot composition is solid. Like, this is not on par with fucking Corpse Killer or the great but ever schlockier D. This feels like a more accomplished, mature experience about a writer, his apprentice, and the spooky, mysterious house with some spooky, mysterious residents. But I suppose if you look at a later released game like Glass Rose or, hell, even D, it tends to be the dub that makes shit dummy, which is obviously not an issue Rampo runs into. Still, though, just the fact alone that it isn't about some wacky go-fucky adventure game story, but about this heady old-school writer suggests that this certainly wasn't aiming for the same edgy audience as like Seventh Guest or Night Trap, nor the teenage aim targets that Sing would pick. It is a dense, smart game about dense, smart ideas, with a dense, smart, slow presentation. It's quite different. What's also neat is that the roles are reversed as opposed to other games of this type. As see, you are the landlord. You're Spencer. You're the owner of Hotel Dusk, the Dracul indeed. You're going around fucking using your peephole network and harassing the tenants for rent. You ain't call hiding shit, not knowing what to do with limited access. If someone has their door locked or refuses to talk, you just bust out the key ring and see what's up. I can only imagine that this is the big dick kicker that really impacts how the mystery unfolds. And I really wish that I could properly understand shit outside of the few slivers of vocalized Japanese what I can comprehend. I did not get very far, though needless to say, either way, shit certainly seems really fucking great and interesting, and above all, pretty darn indicative of the many mysterious games that await us on the SEGA Saturn.
Misterioso videojuegos de SEGA Saturn.
So yeah, I actually bought one of these motherfuckers. It's a Japanese model, though that doesn't really mean much given that this card allows me to bypass piracy protection and thus play games burnt to discs, which I will do because fucking Jesus. I did buy RAMPO though. Something about it being the sole physical Saturn game that I own was quite hilarious to me. Sadly, it can't be that as my Saturn came with a game called Xmas Nights into Dreams.
Ho ho ho! Merry Christmas, bitch.
From what I can tell, it's just Nights, but with Xmas, making it the superior version, and honestly a rather mysterious game all its own. Cause, I mean, you're like, on rails, on a 2D plane, but also its interpretation of those two concepts is somewhere along the lines of They're stuck in a 2D circular loop within a 3D world, basically, in which you can move up or down and back and forth, but not in and out of the screen unless that's where the camera go. And within this loop, you collect balls that you bring to the ball dispository station at the start of the loop, where it'll go,
Oh my balls!
Add to that enemies, high speeds, a barrage of colors, and hard-to-define fore and background elements at times, and you end up with one giant funhouse acid trip of a game that has some whiffs of the crazier Sonic levels, seeing as this was made by Sonic Team, just with none of the frustration and potential instant death drops. But yeah, this is one strange-ass game, as they weren't just trying to make an early 3D game version of another genre as was common during this gen, but they instead were trying to make their own whole genre creatively using a 3D space. SEGA had been pushing Dreamcast-level graphics even before the Saturn came out in arcades, you see. Like, for years I had assumed that this version, the Saturn version of Daytona USA, was how the 1993 arcade release looked, and that the later Dreamcast game was a visual upgrade, but instead that was the near-perfect arcade version. So basically, they had already done 3D versions of 2D games. Not Sonic Team themselves, I don't think, but I wouldn't be surprised if that played into why Nights is what it is, as opposed to what most other early 3D games are. This ain't just Sonic's ass game. Mainly because Sonic's ass was way too busy being a bitch. Sonic Extreme, aka Motion Sickness the Game, was a 3D Sonic title in development for the SEGA Saturn. It would be made by the Sega Technical Institute, which was their American branch, headed up by Mark PlayStation. Would be, because it wasn't ever really. I'm sure there's some research-heavy channels out there who spilled the tea on this bee, but it more or less boiled down to the Japanese Nights team not wanting to give away their engine, the US team having next to no experience with the Saturn and its architecture, it not even having started development as a Saturn game to begin with, and a whole bunch of corporate drama with different teams with different ideas, and yeah, Sonic's sucking ass game for sure. So as a result, they just dropped the port of Sonic 3D Blast, which, I mean, you know, it has 3D in the title. I played it for a bit. Music's really great. Gameplay is nauseating mostly, but it's alright. Very strong system seller, obviously. Help. Sonic Team, though, aside from making Nights, was also making moves in 3D modeling a Sonic, which took the form of Sonic Jam, a fucking collection of old games with some added modes and other needities, but also this thing called Sonic World, an actual explorable environment in which one can run around as Sonic and access said needities. Which is neat, but still not exactly clearly a full-on 3D Sonic's ass game yet. Luckily, there exists a
race for the goal with Sonic and his pals. Wow!
Yeah, it's Sonic R, motherfucker. The only 3D Sonic game the Saturn ever needed. I think. I like it at least. It's not a masterpiece by any means, but the soundtrack sure as shit is, and it is a very unique take on the idea of a kart racer in that it keeps level designisms of the mainline titles intact while also race. And Sonic continues to spin toward the future. Nothing will stop him. Now, a lot of these Sonic-related things would be cited as reasons for the Saturn's failure. I, however, would say that that's some Nintendo-pilled bullshit. A real screw attack moment. A Nintendo power oopsie. A Shigsy sandwich. Why the fuck did I write this? Because if anything, it's a reason as to why the Saturn thrives, as it sits at the core of why its energy is so mysterious. Thing is that it has the same 90s experimentalism as seen on the PS1, only it was also also rather hard to make games for due to its funky architectures, specifically 3D ones as it rendered into more confusing quads over the safe and homely polygons. I am David the Cage. Yes, polygons. So many emotions. So it wasn't really the best equipped to handle 3D graphics, making many of its initial depictions of it rather unique. Even though certain games like Virtua Fighter 2 or Dead or Alive looked far more stable than what the competition could muster, that uniqueness still tainted its reputation. After that, the fact that it had no real mascot game aside from Knights, or, well, in Japan it had
SEGA Saturn.
But what I mean is a lot of kids bought the PS1 and N64 because of Crash, Spyro, Mario, and Banjo. And let's just say that Bug didn't exactly have that type of selling power. Wow, that's cringe. And so, suffice to say, it wasn't the best-selling console in any market, despite it doing pretty decently well in Japan, all things considered. And where I could take the red M imprinted pill and call this a L, I won't. As it's because of this that Sega became sorta desperate, either to sell units or to establish its own identity, thus publishing and funding more or less anything, which then drew in the freaks. Just fuck your mainstream JRPG blockbusters. Have this weird experimental postmodern meta story dragon game with Japanese voice acting. Woo! Wait. What's that? FMV games that are like horror or action movies are all the rage? Bruh, have this one that's basically an art house drama about a suffering writer/landlord. Also, 3D platformer? Bitch, my name is Knights. And I will suck your dick. Not to mention that this had the most effect on how the system would be marketed as well. Sega, why? Overall, it just created this borderline bizarre and wonky environment to the point where even those who've worked on Saturn games would look back at them like this.
The game is fucking, but the music is amazing!
Everything about this is really hecking my shit. Look at this goddamn title screen. It's literally one of my thumbnails, and oh man, goddamn, the developer splash screens.
Death Crimson!
Death Crimson, baby.
Yeah, Death Crimson! Yeah, give me that Death Crimson. Ah!
But yeah, Death Crimson is a light gun shooter by AQUA, who nowadays are known primarily for teaming up with French bread on those mega birth under night circumcision heart blood melt anime fighters that frighten me. This one here though is cut from a very different cloth. A Kuso cloth, one might say, as it's largely known for being shit, but in a good way that's funny. I mean, it looks like a fucking mess. There's barely any sound effects, and the ones that exist aren't very great. The hit detection is iffy, the controls are stiffy, and the camera moves with the grace and elegance of a fuck this joke format, who do you think I am, a basic? But also, just like, look at it. Look at the sheer chaos of it all. The inherent comedic timing of the opening FMV. Not to mention the way how enemies just pop up and explode with the loudest, distortest fucking noises ever. Or how legit really cool a lot of the actual visual design is as well. And of course, the what the fuck evenness of the soundtrack. I fucking love this. It's part post-ironic, aesthetic, exploration, 3D indie game collage, part the room of video games. One thing I didn't quite anticipate though, having only looked and appreciated this game through YouTube videos, is just how badly it'd actually play. I mean, big occasional explodes aside, you don't get any feedback for when you hit shit, nor do you do for when ammo run out and when you need to reload, so you can't really feel the game at all, if that makes any sense. There's no kinesthetics. Add to that the aiming reticle being beyond sensitive and the game looking and animating as it does, with enemies entering and exiting the screen willy-nilly and the camera going all over the place, often giving you next to no time to react, and you end up with something that's really hard to play, yet not in a fun way. Now, I would not have minded this, even in the slightest, if the game was babby easy. But it's a pretty straight arcade port in which you only get one credit, Panzer Dragoon style. So, actually playing the game, actually requires god-tier gamer skills. Luckily, you can access debug mode by inputting R, Z, and start on the second player controller during gameplay, which then makes one invulnerable. Sadly, I don't have a second player controller, but luckily, part 2, on player 1, you can use the debug to skip around the levels a bit, so I still managed to get the places even if I died like every 2 seconds due to the game becoming near impossible as it goes on. I guess the reticle situation would be insta-solved by using a light gun as well, but that still wouldn't solve the difficulty and also CRT heavy. What is interesting to note here is that the arcade version looked like this. Yeah, the whole fucking thing is how the game is meant to be played, which instantly puts it back in my good graces again. For what it's worth as well, I did find myself getting better with each try. The trick being that I started to memorize where enemies willy-they-nilly so you can pop and make them pop ditties. And it's also goofy to the point where it's easy to just become sorta accepting of it, in the sense that I wasn't ever mad at it, especially with the cutscene transitions going full Windows Movie Maker on them, and it's pretty fucking funny. Which does beg the question, is it bad on purpose? Because, I mean, other Kusoge games do be like that. It's a whole genre based around titles being so trashy that they become funny. Parodius, the Chowaniki series, stuff like that. Those shits ain't incompetent, they're just dumb and meant to make you laugh. Though, not all are intently made to be that way. There's certainly some the rooms in there too, and with Death Crimson, it's hard to say, really. Parts of it reek of comedic intent, as even the credit sequence is one of the funniest ones I've ever seen. Plus, it even got a sequel on a Dreamcast, which is actually really fun and legit plays well while also being super weird. And Equal also made the official Segata Sanshiro game for the Saturn, so I can't imagine that they were this scathingly incompetent in every which way. Regardless, though, I like it. Also, on a different tip, this is my own Dreamcast footage. I own one of those now too. Fully tricked out even with the SD card reader and shit, which I don't usually bring attention to this, but I could not and would not have bought any of this, including the Saturn, many of the games for this video, a scan converter, and a whole new fancy-ass capture card if it wasn't for my Patreons. So everyone, give him a round of applause!
Patreon.
Huh. So that's how the Saturn works. Now, another big part as to why the Saturn was doomed to the Mysterioso realm was due to its showcase centerpiece game being Virtua Fighter. But hey, you say, while perhaps being a bit basic and simple, the first Virtua Fighter is still good, and yeah, just not the original port released for the Saturn, which was one giant technical dumpster fire plagued by low frame rates and buggy visuals. Of course, they later re-released it and fixed all of that, but it certainly didn't exactly result in the Saturn coming out swinging when compared to what the PS1 was showcasing with Tekken. Designed and cooked up by the same guy, funnily enough, Seiichi Ishii, who spearheaded the original VF1 to fulfill his 3D fighter needs, then went to Namco to essentially make the same game again, but this time fulfilling his edgier, cooler, more stylistic needs with Tekken 1, and then perfecting those needs with 2, cause, I mean, you don't really top corporate purple suit Kazuya with the angel in the giant evil skyscraper as far as cool and edgy go. And so then he went off again to do Tobal, Guys, and the Bouncer. So clearly far greener pastures than the fate that befell the Tekken series. Ew. Either way, while Tekken was more of a personality-driven spin on the first Virtua Fighter, Sega 2 came out with a 2 being Virtua Fighter 2. That didn't so much make things more stylish or whatever, but just made shit like really fucking good. The problem with that though, is that while being really fucking good may fly in arcades and in the FGC, it didn't exactly fly in the households of kids looking for something cool the same way that Tekken did. So Sega was like, hey, fuck it, let's make something cool and extreme. Add music, that's all. Add sexy babes, destructible armor, cool cuts and fast camera pans and elements of cage fighting, roller derby and fucking bowling, and put Jotaro in there too, resulting in Fighting Vipers. And I'm not gonna lie, I goddamn love this game. It's so fast and dumb and crazy and over the top, and has all the energy of a late 80s strip club hair metal band with the viscerality and satisfaction of the bestest Sega arcade games. It's cool, it's quick, it stands out, and god fucking damn it, it's still not selling! Quick, pull the stupid alarm! We must break out the Daytona car. Fighters Mega Mix is where they ended up. Yu Suzuki's magnum opus, Fuck Shenmue, featuring the likes of Bark the Polar Bear of Sonic the Fighters, a Jalapeno, Virtua Cum Lady, various Virtua Fighters and Fighting Vipers peeps, and of course, the centerpiece, Hornet from Race Game. Fuck Daytona USA. It's loud, has tons of content, and is easily the most ambitious crossover fighting game in existence. Fuck Smash Brothers. And it's actually pretty darn great too. It combines Fighting Vipers with Virtua Fighter quite literally, in that it uses mechanics of both. Retaining the flashy montage, hard-hitting vibes of Vipers for instance, but combining it with the slower, more methodical combo focusedness of VF. So it's not as immediately dumb fun, but it has more longevity given that it has shit to learn. And boy howdy, does it ever dig into that. You got like 32 characters, all with wildly different fighting styles, tons of stages, some with breakable rings and others more traditional, and it goes hard on the single player content too, boasting various campaigns allowing one to unlock shit, which isn't something any of the prior more straightforwarded arcade ported games did. And generally, shit just plays really fucking great, especially with it implementing another influence from a game running in this engine, goddamn Sonic the Fighters. I kid you not. Aside from it simply sharing some of its cast, Sonic the Fighters was almost sorta good in that it had a lot of bounce tech, resulting in juggles, cool little wall jumps, and these insane launching capabilities. It played a lot with distance, basically, and how one could quickly clear it or create it aggressively. And Mega Mix pretty much crimped that shit wholesale, making for one of the juggliest, jumpiest, and ass-blastiest fighters in existence. Like, see how that chick just jump off a wall? Many little techie mechanics like that may very well have been present in either VF or FV, but it's brought to the foreground something fierce here, which allows Mega Mix to reach the potential that Sonic the Fighters, I guess, had, and that in and of itself is really fucking funny. But also good, because it means that when you kind of get a handle on the feel of things, you can get the
launching and running and juggling and blasting motherfuckers all over the place, easily making this one of the fastest, most kinetic fighting games of the 5th gen. Animations is also fluid, yet snappy enough to avoid that toe ball lag, and hits is punchy as fuck with those old-timey, crunchy martial arts movie sound effects. Honestly, on the audio front, the game has quite a vibe in general. Reusing tons of iconic Virtua Fighter tracks, as well as the hairy-as-fuck metal butt rock of Vipers, and even some other cool remixes of iconic Sega tracks, but also using some more Tekken-esque atmospherics like this stage here with the blowing wind. After which, of course, the Sega MIDI bum rock guitars come blasting back in. It's some truly great shit. Aw man, I love it when you gotta entry your name. Brings a tear to me eye, it does. Also, the game isn't as hard as the VF games tend to be when playing against the AI. I tend to not really jive with that, as it doesn't so much teach you how to play as that it just expects you to be able to. Of course, if you press on, you'll learn eventually, but this game being a bit easier gives you far more room to actually try shit while playing the game, rather than forcing you into the practice mode or whatever. Shit marries entertainment with learnment, which is great given how much there is to learn in the first place. Game's got depth. Sadly, it does frame rate a little bit. Some parts make you go, dang, that's a frame rate right there. To the point where shit slows the fuck down, which may or may not hurt its chances of ever showing up at EVO despite said depth. Granted, I couldn't give less of a fuck, cause I mean, look at it go. The low FPS can for sure amp up some epic slow-mo moments, and is also totally some artistic callback to the Dural stage from Virtua Fighter that was actually underwater. Totally. If not, the FPS making it uncompetitivable, though some of the characters playing like shit probably also doesn't help. Thing is, as much as I love Daytona Car don't play good. Very stiff. Weak hits, sometimes overheats and nearly kills itself even. Also, there's a bit of a discrepancy between the VF and the FV characters, updated though the former be. It's not exactly a very balanced game, so to say. Then again, if the Virgin Smash Brothers can be competitive just through having all of its shit turned off thus denying the actual game, then I'm sure we can negotiate a way to have this absolute giga chad of a fighter being represented competitively proper too. As it really is the best of both worlds when it comes to old school Virtua Fighter and the wackier Vipers, with heaps of added shit for you to unlock, learn, laugh at, and gawk. I genuinely really loved it. The stages, the music, the wacky, zany characters, and just the quick, speedy, visceral feel of it all, I'd legit put it right up there with Tekken 3 and Streetman EX2 as fighters I'ma go play recreationally a bunch. Though my standards on that are pretty weird admittedly. I'd love to see another game like this come out again though, digging even deeper into the Sega lore. Put goddamn Altered Beastman in there. Ulala. Alex Child, Kazuma Kiryu, Hatsune Miku, cause I know y'all got that license. And of course, motherfucking Kaki. Do it, Sega, you cowards! So, this is one of those goddamn fish tank screensaver type things. To bamboozle, bazinga, and hoodwink motherfuckers into thinking that you have a real ass aquarium, only surprise! It was the goddamn Saturn all along. It's called AQUA Zone Desktop Life, by the way, and I really only got this because the box art seemed sort of interesting. There is a bit more to it than just a screensaver though. You can customize tanks, change backgrounds, and even feature little fishies for no other reason than why not? But there's no real goal or objective or story. It just kinda is what it is. And what it is, in some minor way, says a lot about the Saturn was, below its wacky, weird, mysterious surface. Something that I alluded to already with RAMPO, i.e. the thinking person's console. Its own system menu with the deep spatial void of endless contemplation, titles like Panzer Dragoon Saga or Enemy Zero pulling big metatextual philosophy storylines, RAMPO being about serious old men doing serious old man things, Nights into Dreams experimental ass foregoing the typical platformer for something far more interesting, or how Power Slave was clearly an effort to try and connect with the older skewing PC crowd, or how it in general kinda successfully managed a lot of what the edgier 3DO tried to do. All seem to me like efforts to carve out an audience unique to the SEGA Saturn. Sure, it may have been off-putting to the childs and teens of the 90s, but there's certainly a whole lot to look back at and appreciate there now, as there's many heady, smarter games with well-new art directions. Not in the big, blockbuster FF7 type sense, but in a more low-key, art-housey type of way. Granted, it's not like the PS1 didn't have these types of experiences either. Even the N64 tried to do a similar vibe with its Zelda titles, and that probably also plays into why it never really took off that much. But where shit differs is that Sega commissioned or funded these games themselves. These were Prime titles, not weirdo offshoots like Moon was on the PS1. So, while on the outset the Saturn may have seemed like a floundering, directionless console from a floundering, directionless company, I do think that they really tried to do something special here. Perhaps still as an effort to cynically grasp at straws from a corporate side, sure. But from a creative side, there was certainly a push to really try some wild, revolutionary concepts, which I think is exactly why titles like the Panzer Dragoon series are still so well remembered as cult classics even decades later. Though, not all games were quite that lucky. Some would sadly fall to the tides of obscurity. Script notes lead into lunacy. So, you're a Fred, and you came to this creepy little town to find some answers to questions that he has about his past. Too bad for him though, there's like puzzles and FMVs and really creepy vibes and this one dude called Anthony who may or may not want his ass. Also, a whole bunch of other weirdos like this scary motherfucker who follows you around, and a ghost, and a rude doctor.
You again? What do you want? If you've come empty-handed, there's the door.
And pretty much shit ain't gonna be as easy as just asking around town, though that isn't still not what you do, neither. Hell yeah, fitting music. So the game was produced and developed by System Saycom, funded by Sega themselves, and I'm pretty sure imagined wholly by my friend Devin, who was more or less the only person to have ever acknowledged its existence. Me covering this now probably broke the hinges off of some ancient pagan spell that kept the universe in equilibrium as the Mind Zone world seeps into reality, but that's just how it has to be. As far as games of this type go though, this one's surprisingly accessible and easy. You see, shits like Myst or the cooler, edgier titles that preceded it like Alice tend to focus on a very narrow puzzle mindset. i.e. one puzzle, one solution. You could navigate a bit, and there'd usually be more than one thing for you to tinker with, but in the end, you still kinda had to do what you were meant to do, and it certainly felt that way too. Now, Lunacy, at its core, isn't different per se, but it feels like it is, as shit's wholly open. You got like this entire town that you can freely dick around and get lost in, tons of buildings you can enter, people you can talk to, full 3D directions that you can turn in always, even towards sides that yield nothing. Basically, it's an FMV game that doesn't necessarily play like one. You ain't on rails or railroaded much of anywhere and has far more in common with a game like Shadow of Memories structurally. So while this does mean that Lunacy has a lot of puzzles going on at once, you're free to solve them in whichever order you please, which, when paired with the freedom of movement, keeps it from ever being overwhelming. More often than not, I tended to just stumble across puzzle items or solutions just through exploring and talking to people using my own curiosity. It's more natural, I guess. Less like clear, gamey progress blockers and more like you are just going about asking around to find out what's going on. In a way, this does change how the game makes itself fun, as normally you'd be a sleuthing detectivo man, figuring out the small mysteries, getting past all the tiny blockades. And in Lunacy, shit's more about everything crescendoing to big payoff moments that'll utilize everything that you've learned regarding the plot and lore and all of the items that you've added to your inventory along the way, all at once.
Perfect specimens, each and every one. I suppose.
I gotta say, I fucking love how the plot unfurrows through this. It's one of those stories that tends to sow more doubt and mystery than it ever clears up. You can just examine a windmill, for example, and have Homie casually mention that the town has no wind.
Yeah. Pretty good business. A town with no wind, don't you think?
Like, what the fuck does that even mean? Literally? Or more like just generally, but wind is possible? Is the town in like a weird stasis? And so on. Such a small mention can leave you wondering as you wandering, and wandering you shall. Which blends very well with said big crescendo puzzle structures giving answers and unlocking new mysteries. And, well, let's just say that the FMVs and the presentation in general is already pretty fucking mysterious to begin with. Sure, it has the stilted animations and the 90s has voice acting, but man, just look at how this shit is lit. What place, time of day, or weather condition could make for lighting so sepia? So deeply, darkly, sinisterly sepia. Characters here are generally quite unfriendly, or at least a bit brash.
What do you want?
My name is Fred. I am a traveler.
Oh, a traveler. Well, I'm Mac. I am very fond of clocks. Seen any good timepieces lately?
Not me. I've got all the time in the world.
Go away. I have no respect for a man who has no respect for time.
And then Fred just kind of stands there taking the abuse. It's weird. Moods flip so fast during scenes, shit's nuts. And what adds to this is how everyone always leaves unceremoniously even within their own homes. Of course, they can't be in the scene post-scene as it's all pre-rendered, so altering the scenes to put people in them would have been a lot of effort, but something about someone telling you to fuck up out of their home and them then leaving the room is a weird fucking vibe for sure. A very lonely one, where even the nicer people seem as if they just want to get away from your weird Fred ass as quickly as possible. It's like, while 90s voice acting and animation do certainly just kind of be that way, you can clearly tell that they wanted a great dense sense of uncanniness. The game design is just too elegant and its atmosphere too intentional, with tons of really great directing and cool shot compositions, that I can't possibly fathom this game's overall vibe being some sort of happy accident. Especially because it's not really funny bad acting either. I referenced Shadow of Memories before, and it definitely reminded me of a darker, spookier version of it. The music, for example, often uses dissonant chords or playful string plucks or big, sweeping romantic violin solos. It's doing that thing where it's like pretty with the Rose but eerie with the Anthony. Person-friendly one moment, mean the next. Purposefully conflicting moods that only create more uncertainty of what's ahead than the ever-present looming darkness already breeds. At the same time, it also pulls actual Resi-style score shit during the cutscenes, with line reads that are either too fast or too slow to match the timing of the Japanese ones, making for just the oddest vibe in conjunction with the stilted animations, really eerie character designs, and excellent lighting. The game just has a strong energy to it, for real. One where the mystery is more interesting than the actual answers, but manages to keep the presentation of those answers strange enough to where shit just feels big. And like I said, the game plays well too. Walking around and puzzling is never as tedious or obtuse as it is in even the best of FMV games, pretty much solely creating a similarly daunting atmosphere just through its visuals, storytelling, writing, and beautifully haunting music alone. A hidden gem in the truest sense, and a title that, if it would have been released on, say, the PS1, likely would have had a far larger cult following it about. It's like a darker Sing game, being comfy and rainy day to a T, but also scathingly sinister through and through. Never difficult, but still dense, mature, and clever, but not in the least bit pretentious either. And I guess, in that, it fits in better with the SEGA Saturn and its potent mysteriousness, continued with the direction that the Dreamcast went in. Titles like D2, Shenmue, LOL, Seaman, Egg, Desperia, Mach X, and Illbleed, and many more, also all seem to try something smarter or meta-seeming, for lack of a better term. Postmodern, maybe even. Sadly, with the PS2 looming, also blasting about its edgier, older-oriented aesthetic from the rooftops, the Dreamcast sold equally as poorly due to its shine being stolen early on into its run. But a great system too in its own right, cause, hey, who fucking even needs system sellers so you can just as well boast a library full of genre-defining, influential, and thought-provoking cult classics.